You are listening to Missed Apex Podcast. We live F1. Welcome to Missed Apex Podcast Midweek Report. I'm your host, Richard Reddy, but my friends call me Spanners, so let's be friends. I am back and in control of the shed. Since the last time I spoke to you, there have been 3 Missed Apex productions without Spanners. So clearly the network is crumbling, but go back and listen to Sunday's news show with Christina, Stuffy and Brad. They had a fantastic chat about driver standards. The Formula E crew also did their Berlin E-Prix race review, and the MotoGP lot, hosted by Kyle and a bunch of Derricks, also have their review of the French motorcycle race up and running on Spotify. We'll put links to all those in the show notes below. But today, we're going to bring you a bit of a news update. There's some things I want to rant about. Stefano Domenicali has triggered me with talk of a 2030 engine change. There's some contract rumours as well, and there's a bunch of stuff that Matt has written down in a document that we'll go through. And then also, I think towards the end of the show, we will have a direct comparison between the F1 live in-person experience we had in Miami and the NASCAR experience that we had with 2311 race team in Darlington, and just compare those as fan experiences. We are going to do a full NASCAR special because we had unbelievable access, and I want to share a little bit of the time we had there. You know, I was able to sit down with their chief strategist, their driver coach, the sim racing staff, of course, the president, their chief mechanic, and both the drivers. And we were given 15 minutes of time to speak to those guys, and it was really illuminating. Plus, the PR guy gave us a bit of a tip off to some of the inside jokes afterwards too. So we're going to do that as a whole separate section. But first, we're going to get into the big dirty news with this fella. We've got Matt Trumpets here. Hello, Matt. Long time no see.
Indeed, turning left is better than not turning at all.
Yeah, so obviously they have road courses, but we wouldn't be doing our job as F1 fans if we didn't mock NASCAR for only turning left.
Or be impressed at how they turn left, because I'll tell you, it looks a lot different in person.
I mean, look, I don't want to dwell too much on that at the beginning, but yes, the second we saw the pack go through the first turn, the whole, they only turn left, just flies out of the window, because you go, oh my God, there's so much to that.
Yeah, it sounds very simple when you say it, and It looks simple on TV. Yeah, but this is one of the annoying things that we learned, but we'll get to that later.
Yeah, now we're fully on board with you just have to be there, don't you? So
I hate it, but it's true.
No, because somebody emailed, and I'll find the email that says, "Can you not now apply that to Monaco and accept that's true?" And no, that's a stage too far. However, if everyone's willing to band together to send me to Monaco, I'm not gonna complain. Don't send Matt. He won't be converted. I'm easily swayed by, for example, merchandise. If Monaco as a Grand Prix bought me a Monaco Grand Prix hat, that might be enough. I'm very bribable.
Yeah, unlike me, I cannot be bribed in the slightest.
All right, why don't we move on to... Okay, sorry, audio listeners. We are dripping head to toe in NASCAR gear that we got at Darlington. But let's talk about some of the news stories with the big dirty news. Okay, so the first thing that has triggered me, Matt, is this statement from Stefano Domenicali that they're looking at the 2030 season to go, well, why don't we just get rid of these hybrids? I mean, wouldn't a lot of the problems be solved if we got rid of the hybrid and we were light and just used, petrol? And I'm absolutely livid because we're getting a new set of regulations in 2026, and the only reason why you'd be looking at 2030 to make such a fundamental change is basically an admission that you've got the next regulation set wrong.
Well, I think it's a little more complicated than that.
No room for nuance.
I will say that here's a rare point of agreement. I, too, am incensed that they would talk about changing the regulations in 2030 when they've just changed them in 2026. And you know who else is not going to be happy about that?
Every manufacturer.
Every manufacturer, because I can't imagine they make their money back on the 26 engines or get what they want out of it. Changing back to simpler engines, too. And for me, it's just a Formula One thing. All right, Formula One is the pinnacle of motorsports engineering, or supposedly so. They've been going backwards in the suspension department, claiming they need to save costs. They've been going backwards in this department, need to be simpler, need to be this. Okay, fair enough. But that's stuff that's all under the hood and most people don't pay attention to. But if you're going to say, oh, let's go back to a 2008 power unit, well, why not just get the engines from NASCAR? They're both V8s, and you could probably just buy them cheaper from the people already making them than having to make new ones yourself. And if not, I mean, really, if you want to say it's a cultural, iconic, historical connection we want, well, then go back to those V10s, because to me, those are still the ultimate sound of Formula One. At least you'd have a point there. But his whole thing is, hey, you know, if these fuels, these fully synthetic fuels work out and we're not poisoning the atmosphere anymore, why not just have big, loud, dirty engines and stick them back in and get rid of the batteries?
I just feel very triggered that this feels like an admission that the hybrids was a mistake. And I think everybody thought at the time massive, heavy hybrid engines was a mistake for racing. And I think it's proved to be a mistake. What's the thing that everybody complains about? The size of the cars. They're massive. They're not agile. They're difficult to drive. You know, we've heard that a Haas driver has reported that you can feel the loss of a car, and this was just from someone we know, you can feel the loss of the car 3 seconds before it's going to go. You just can't do anything about it. That's how like, undrivable these things are. And it all comes down to the weight, and the weight is nearly all the hybrid engine. You could still be safe. You could add some of it's the safety structure.
No, it's more than just the battery. The battery's a big chunk.
Did I say just? No, yeah, what, the whole recovery. Let's do no recovery whatsoever. How much weight do we lose?
I'd have to go maybe 100 kilos.
No,
maybe.
It's got to be more than that. You're telling me that you can't get.
I tell you what, you vamp, I Google.
Okay, so you're telling me this is my instinct is that if you just did a fully just performance ICU engine without any of the hybrid parts, my guess would be you're taking 250 kilograms out of the equation straight away. And then if you really drove to go, right, no, being light is important, or let's at least get it back to the turn of the century, then you have a racing series where at that fundamental complaint that seems to have really killed racing since those glory eras at the beginning of the 2000s, sort of 2000 to 2008, are you telling me we can't get back to that?
Well, I'm not going to tell you we can get back to that or not, but what I can tell you is that the minimum weight of the hybrid power system roughly was set 50 kilograms more than the previous era without. So you're talking about a plus 50 kilogram minimum weight to go hybrid. And the thing that gets me, people always complain about the MGUH, but I think the issue with the power units they're going to is, one, they wanted to get rid of the MGUH because it's delicate and complex. It is, however, an amazing bit of kit and extremely efficient, and also doesn't weigh very much on its own.
But I don't
we're
care.
Not saving much weight about that.
But I don't care how efficient a Formula One car is. Like that's if it's just for the sake of how far can we go with a. Do you remember initially it was you could get 100 kilograms of fuel, and that was your lot, and it controlled the fuel flow, whereas that's gone out the window. So they realised that initial aim wasn't worthy.
Well, they've I think they've upped it a little bit, but the point that I want to make here is that when I heard those engines for the first time, I'd never heard an engine like it. And Formula One has the most advanced, powerful engines of any series that I'm aware of. There are more powerful engines, but there are none that are more advanced. And no motorsport gets anywhere close to the kind of thermal efficiency Formula One gets right now. It's staggering that you can have an internal combustion, a hybrid system that's almost 60% efficient. That's like unheard of numbers. From an engineering point of view, these things are a marvel, and they've been a marvel from the moment they hit the track. Now, they were afraid. That's why Volkswagen didn't want to join. So they said, let's get rid of the MGUH, which doesn't weigh much and contributes a huge amount to efficiency. Let's get rid of that, and let's make the hybrid more powerful. But wait, it's Audi. We're afraid, so we won't let you regenerate off the front axle. So now we have to do stupid aerodynamic tricks to have cars that will actually get around the racetrack the way we want the power units to be programmed. It's all a consequence of letting sort of the marketing from the top make these kinds of technical decisions when it should be bubbling up the other direction.
Marketing from the top, you're correct. Okay, so Brent makes a comment. Sustainable fuels weren't a thing when the hybrids were introduced, were they? Seems short-sighted to say it was a mistake from the beginning. Adam, hello Adam, chips in with, I believe MotoGP is sustainable fuels as of last year. So I want this to be clear. I'm not saying they should have been sustainable fuels from the beginning, nor am I saying if sustainable fuels were available at the time, that should have been the way to go. Because the reason they had hybrid and the reason they're now doing sustainable fuels is a nod to road relevance. So that's the way they were going, because they're so dependent on, you know, the works teams. They want the road car names on the road. But sustainable fuels, I will argue this until I'm blue in the face, until actually someone can show me that you can run the road network on sustainable fuels. You can't. It's never, ever going to happen. Then saying that sustainable fuels is road relevance is it's purely marketing. So it's purely optics to go, look, we've got these magic fuels that don't hurt the environment. But it's a nonsense, because you can't grow. It's not like EVs where there's no chargers, but in time we'll build chargers. There isn't physically the land and resources on the planet to make sustainable fuels the road network choice. So it's even less of an option than hydrogen, which theoretically you could go down an all hydrogen path if you really wanted to. It's just that it's the Betamax and the VHS of electric is just miles ahead of it. Hydrogen is physically possible. Sustainable fuels aren't physically possible. So the whole optics of sustainable fuels is just as big a mistake as hybrid. It's just that using sustainable fuels won't really affect the performance. Like, it's fine. If you want to use it, that's fine. It's just that your message isn't true, that you're doing this for, you know, amazing earth-saving reasons. The hybrid is closer to earth-saving reasons, but it's so detrimental to the racing that who cares?
But you've not even seen how the push-to-pass is going to work yet. Here's my prediction. If they get it working right, everyone's going to be very excited about the push-to-pass rules. And then they go away in 4 years, and we get engines and aerodynamics back that are the worst combination possible. Because you'll have aerodynamics that make it impossible to pass, and you'll have to go back to DRS or something else to make it possible. I don't know. It's always a tough nut. But what I will say about this is literally something Stefano Domenicali said off the cuff. He's not talked to the teams about it. He hasn't talked to the manufacturers about it. He just said, hey, you know, if these magic fuels work out, we could just go back to having V8s again. And wouldn't that be fantastic?
Well, but he's right in a way, because the magic fuels, they will work out. So having sustainable fuels will be just like having petrol. It's not really going to make any change, but that would be a face-saving way to withdraw from hybrids. So this is my suspicion at the moment, which is they go, man, the 2026 regulations don't look good. And I bet you Red Bull are kicking off, because we're hearing things about the Ford effort that's not great. And Ford, the most worrying thing out of Ford was there was a statement recently that said, oh yeah, our commitment to the engine has sort of evolved a little bit, because at first they were only going to do the electronics. Yeah, so they were going to provide, not that that's a minor thing, but it's not the power unit. It's the electronics to the power unit. But now they were like, oh, well, our involvement has changed from what we initially thought we were going to do. Then we hear these reports that it just keeps blowing up. Then everybody and their dog wants to leave Red Bull. Everything, all the noises out of Red Bull are negative. So I bet you anything, Horner's on the blower constantly going, these regulations are dire. And then all of a sudden, just 4 years later, so 26, 27, 28, 29, now they're talking about 2030, a massive regulation change. It's not a tweak, a massive regulation change 4 years into this 2026 regulation. They wouldn't even be talking about that. It wouldn't even come up if the 2026 regs had not been identified as a massive failure already. That's how I feel.
Massive failure for whom? Because I think you put your finger on it with Horner. Who's having a hard time right now? Well, first of all, let's not make Ford problems out of Red Bull problems. Red Bull has told Honda, goodbye. You know what? We got this. We can do this. We can build a thing. We can hire all the technicians. We can build our own power unit. It's harder than it looks, is what I'm guessing after, reviewing recent history. It's harder than it looks, even if you're in the business. And so maybe they've stumbled, maybe they've come across some trouble. I don't know. Other people I hear say they have a fully built model and it works great. We'll find out in 26. But my guess is somebody with Domenicali's ears is having a hard time, and they want to get rid of the bit that they can't figure out and make work right. And that's why we're hearing this now. And that's why earlier the same thing. Remember the aerodynamics thing? And everyone's like, oh my gosh, the aerodynamics is terrible. And then Summers came on and he's like, oh yeah, well, they have a whole series of graded models. And it actually turns out that was like the simplest and first model. And they give a bunch of them out to the teams to test to see what goes wrong with them. So you're not even talking the final specification. Why did that leak to the press, and who leaked it to the press, and what do they hope to get out of it? Oh, well, a team that wants to keep things the way they are, doesn't want things to change that way because they lose their advantage, et cetera, and so on. So really, and especially in Formula One, you got to think about stuff like this. When you see stories like this, there is a political agenda in play for a specific team, and that specific team is afraid of losing an advantage that they currently have.
There's also another element. So you're right, loads of things get leaked, and I don't know much about American politics, nor do I have any opinions.
It's a good thing, because you survived your journey through the South safely.
Oh my goodness! So I will say about America, within 10 minutes of meeting anyone, you know their exact political opinions. You guys sure love to tell people exactly what your political opinions are. But that's good. Fine, wear it on your sleeves. In the UK, it's starting from I would say around 2014, which I think is when this current Conservative government got in. They were accused of constant U-turns. So, you said one thing, but now you're doing another. And the tactic they started doing was basically leaking every policy to the press, seeing the reaction, and then coming out and going, no, that was never true. You thought we were going to do that, you fools. And then they'd come out with either a watered down version or it would get dropped. So I do wonder how much Formula One and the teams are starting to adopt these things where they let little things leak, because how many news stories have broken and then there's a PR person's shift or two's worth of time until the official announcement. I do feel like they kind of beta test it by leaking it to various sources. And then, there was a respected journalist who basically got the Albon news leaked, quote unquote, leaked to him, because this is my read, Albon's representation was trying to put Albon's name in the mix for the top seats, for the Mercedes seat that would come up, maybe an Aston seat. The Ferrari seat was still in the loop. I don't know. I think this was when Hamilton moved, and then the Red Bull seat is still in the loop. So you got all these Albon-related rumours, and I think that was testing the waters, see how people react to those things, and then leverage that. So I think that's happening, and I think all of us, listeners, content producers, you're right. We need to be aware when these stories come out that there's an agenda behind the agenda, and that actually we're being used a little bit.
Yeah, or used a lot. And that's okay. I mean, there's a quid and there's a quo here, and we can pro them all we want. But especially when you talk about things like regulations and technical regulations, there's always something else behind it. And when it's denigrating the upcoming regulation set, for sure, someone is behind and unhappy about it and is trying to force their hand. And, we've seen it in the past with, we talked about it, the explodey tires at Silverstone. We've seen it in other series in MotoGP. We've seen riders try to blow up their engines to get out of contracts. This is not any different than that. But the teams have gotten very used to being able to wield this kind of influence, and they've gotten more sophisticated as to how they do it. So yeah, as someone who consumes a lot of Formula One content, you should always sort of ask yourself when you hear some story like, some disastrous thing from the FIA, first thing you want to ask yourself is, well, who benefits? Who benefits if that doesn't happen?
That's why I held out hope when the Lewis Hamilton to Ferrari news came out. So when it was leaked like that, I was, this is a contract negotiation all day long. And then it started getting, reported by Italian press. And the Italian press, years ago, they had that reputation of just reporting any rumor. And now the rest of the internet has caught up with them. So I had that hope that, maybe this is it's a negotiating position for a new Mercedes contract. And then there was the press and then we found out there was a press embargo for later in the afternoon, and we nearly respected it. I did accidentally tweet something, but no one believed me anyway, and I just deleted it and got on with it.
Yeah, well, because that's not really a game we play, because it's mainly a losing proposition.
There's no benefit.
That's all you do.
We get the news, we tweet it or say it on the podcast. Everyone says, "Shut up, loser. That's not true." And then when it gets proved true, no one goes back and says, "Dear Spanners and Matt, we are deeply sorry for calling you a loser." It doesn't happen.
No,
So
it doesn't
no,
ever
yeah.
happen. There's very little
Which is why
advantage to us.
even when we hear stuff now, we just go, "Okay, cool. Okay, well, let's wait till it comes
It's fun
out."
to know for context. But
Yeah.
I think now the interesting thing to me, you bring up the Hamilton thing. Well, there's no advantage to Hamilton for Mercedes to know that, is there? There's not really a great advantage to Mercedes to letting other people know that, is there? So I do sort of wonder who decided to drop the dime, because the one thing
Right,
you can
yeah.
see it causing is a lot of internal strife at Mercedes. And I wonder who that might benefit.
Yeah, that's a good point. So it was clear that Hamilton wasn't planning on telling Mercedes straight away, but it got leaked, and then Hamilton had to then go basically to Toto Wolff's house, I think, and that's the report, that he went to his house, dropped into the kitchen, went, "So it's just a coincidence that it happens to have leaked, but I was planning to come here today anyway." So it was clear that you don't plan to sign that contract and then have the whole awkward year of everyone sort of knowing you're going, and that was all super rushed as well. So we had reports of all hands on deck, everybody come back in to hear this news. So yeah, the leaks. We need the story behind the leaks is just as interesting.
Yeah, and it's always that thing of learning to just take that extra step and think about it, or ask the question, like, who is this going to help out?
Okay, let's move on. So
Yeah,
let's move on. Unless we had more on that, I think that's okay. We're okay with that.
No,
Yeah.
I think we complained enough about that for most people.
But that's not a
Maybe
leak.
Slightly too much for some.
We'll say Dominicali thing. It's not a leak. He just said it. He just went.
Yeah, he just said it, and it's not part of a working group. No teams are behind it. He just had a bright idea and decided to
the
share it.
journalist asked a good enough question to spout it out.
Yeah.
So, and he might have been misquoted. It might be out of context. But I will say we've had a couple of our panel quoted from this show. So there's people who are writing articles for newspapers and websites that are listening to this show. That's great. Hello, I'm glad you're listening. Can I please make a request that you put our panelists' comments in context, like in good context, actually in the article that you're writing? You have a responsibility to these people who are on we're not an affiliated press. We are a podcast, a fan podcast. So the people who come on here, quote me all you want. Quote me out of context all you want. All I will ask is, please, if you're going to quote Brad, Stuffy, Kyle, Alex, people who are salesmen, engineers, coaches who come on this podcast to share their joy of Formula One, if they make an opinion on something, quote the whole thing in context, because we have had death threats to our panelists, okay, and sustained death threats. And the most recent one puts our panelists' comments so out of context, it's irresponsible and unbelievable. Please quote us, but please think about the people you are quoting. You don't have to do that with me and Matt. You can just say anything you want. We're old enough and ugly enough, but please do me a favor, journalists listening to this. If you're going to quote any of our panel, give it the complete context, because some of the things that have just been grabbed out of there, you are directly responsible for the abuse they get. And I just love you to bear that in mind. Okay, Matt, let's talk about updates. So for Imola, it's the Imola Grand Prix coming up, and there's a lot of big talk. It's the usual suspects. Mercedes are going to cure everything in Imola, and so are Aston Martin. What can we expect?
Oh, well, I don't know exactly what Aston is bringing. I know Mercedes is continuing to bring updates to try and fix the problems they caused with the previous updates, but the people that are bringing the big updates here is your new favorite team and my wife's, Ferrari.
Well, I'm not a Ferrari fan yet. Give me time. Come on. Let it settle. I've got
Nope,
a year to
too
go.
late. You're Tifosi. I can see it creeping up. Your color is changing to Tifosi color.
So when your wife was in Miami,
or is that sunburn?
When your wife, yes, I've got a bit of sunburn from Miami. So when your wife was at Miami and she was like, I need to. It was really cool, and I think everyone should do this. If you're going to see a sport for the first time, get behind a team. So she spent significant time at home before the Grand Prix thinking about, right, who's going to be my team? and she landed on Ferrari.
And she landed on Ferrari because she is a Lewis Hamilton fan.
Fair enough.
And she decided that had to be her tribal allegiance going forward. But yeah, it is, it is very Sienna. You pick your tribal allegiance and you stick to it and you have your colors, and it's fantastic. They had 2 testing days at, I want to say, Fiorano, plus the spray guard test, which was an older spec tire. But it's interesting. Vasseur's whole thing with this, it's a big update. There's like 8 different things they're changing. Biggest thing is they're going to, are you ready for this?
I'm ready.
Try not to gasp. They're going to an overbite inlet on the side.
Oh my God, no one knows what you're saying. What are you saying?
So Red Bull had been running what we called the underbite side pod inlet, and everyone swapped to that at the beginning of this season, more or less, except for Red Bull, which swapped to an overbite, unless I've misremembered it. And now Ferrari are going that same direction, and for reasons, I guess. And the big reason actually is the undercut of the side pod can be enlarged and they can bring more clean air down to the floor. Plus they changed the side pod inlet and probably cooling ducts and stuff like that inside of it. But what that means to you and me is that they think they can get close enough to put pressure on Red Bull's strategist in a way that they haven't been before. Because Vasseur's whole theory here is, look, we don't really have to be quite as fast as Red Bull. We just have to be fast enough to force them to make bad choices every now and then. And I like this line of thinking from him because it's pretty accurate. If you're going to be able to split the Red Bulls, if Perez isn't going to be able to directly support Verstappen at the beginning of the race, and you've got both Sainz and Leclerc in between, you can start to exert a lot of strategic pressure on Red Bull. And they're going to sometimes make a wrong call. And that means you stand to benefit, or possibly McLaren. We'll see when we get to the racetrack how well they've done.
Do you know who the last team was to successfully use that disruptor tactic that you described with Vasseur? It was Red Bull in the dominant Mercedes hybrid era when Ferrari was the clear second best team. But who was the best developers in that period? You could argue that it was Red Bull. And they were just trying to get close enough that their pit stops mattered. So they would get into undercut territory or, undercut territory. If they could get a car in Bottas's pit window and make Bottas have to abandon his strategy to cover them off. So that was something that Red Bull did very effectively, but it wasn't a championship winning solution. It was a race winning solution. So, I mean, does that not show a little bit of a lack of ambition if that is a fair reading of Vasseur's approach? They go, well, we just need to mess with them. That's not a winning strategy.
Well, I think it can be a winning strategy. It can be a winning more on the way to beating them ultimately strategy. I think his point is, and we often say this, is you don't want to let the perfect be the enemy of the good. He thinks this will bring them closer. He thinks it will give them more strategic pressure on Red Bull at the front. No more driving away. No more saving tires. We're going to have someone in your pit window. Someone's going long. Someone's going to undercut you. And you're going to have to make a choice. And it may be right and it may be wrong.
Okay, so something I think we didn't cover well enough in the Miami Grand Prix was that 3 teams could have won that race. So like Ferrari definitely had a win in a different set of circumstances. So I'm trying to think, like, on a bad weekend for Red Bull where they just didn't get their setup right. Yeah. McLaren had the rub of the green, but they were still really on fire, and you called that right from the beginning of the weekend. But Sainz could have won that race as well. So there's a universe where Sainz won that race. So they're definitely in the window now where good day versus bad day is an issue, whereas last season, that wasn't the case. So maybe they're creeping a little bit closer.
Yeah, and this is what you want to see in a regulation set. You want to see that margin of victory evaporating. We've already had an earlier, the first season was just unreliability and weirdness. Last season, you had the Singapore oddity, and that was it. This season, we've already seen one thing go wrong for Red Bull and a new winner in a McLaren. between Ferrari there or thereabouts.
Oh, no, there was another thing. There was a Red Bull went wrong in the Australian Grand Prix as well. So, I mean, that's reliability. But that's the other side of pushing. If you push a team hard enough, they're going to make errors that lead to DNFs as well. That's part of it.
So we're seeing cracks in the uber dominance of the Red Bull.
Very small cracks.
Even though at any given race, you're going to show up and say, yeah, Red Bull's probably going to win.
Yeah, they're still the bet every time.
That probably is getting smaller than it was last season. And that's good. It's really good for the sport when you have some competition at the very, very front. Now, once you get down to 5th or 6th place, the competition is mad. And I love it. And it's been great the whole time. But that sharp end of the field is getting a little more crowded.
So letting the perfect be the enemy of the good is a phrase I love, because at some point you just have to, people are discussing the perfect solution. At some point, the grown up in the room, the parent in the room has to go, right, no, that's the direction, we're going. Let's play with what we've got. The opposite of that is Lewis Hamilton's approach. So Lewis Hamilton was complaining that the working tyre window for this car, or for the tyres in general, is the smallest that he's ever had in Formula One. And then we've had, who was the Mercedes engineer? Not Vowles, he's gone, not Allison. Andrew Shovlin.
Andrew Shovlin.
Talking about, well, we shouldn't just settle for the car we have. Lewis Hamilton spending a lot of time doing these experiments because he's trying to really drive forward to see the art of the possible. But there's no doubt that they would have more points this season already if they had their best driver, their fastest driver, focusing on maximizing the actual setup they turn up with on a weekend. Now, there's a rule in golf, Matt, which is play to your swing. So if you get on the first tee and it fades off to the right, and then gets second tee, fades off to the right, you go, whatever I'm doing today there's a slice and it's fading off to the right. So I'll just aim left. I'm going to lose a little bit of distance, but I aim left, and that little bit of fade puts me back in the fairway. You don't try to fix your swing mid-round. And I'm assuming that F1 engineering principles are exactly the same. And I just think Mercedes would be, how much are those experiments actually benefiting them versus simply playing to the swing they have? So Mercedes, if you're listening and make tech decisions based on a podcast in a shed, play to your swing. Don't fix it on the green. Aim left.
Yeah, I don't know. It's a deeper issue for them. I think, honestly, I don't know the point of Lewis Hamilton's setup experiments. They obviously want to optimize whatever they have for every racetrack.
Okay, but show me where it's worked.
Well, where it's working is in the correlation tools they use between CFD and wind tunnel and stuff that goes onto the track. Because I still think that there's some fundamental issue with this category of aerodynamics, that they have a problem that they've not solved that's more fundamental than just bringing the car, what they bring to the track. It's not a question of, if I look at this individual shape, I can model it correctly and it should bring this. The problem is when they screw it all together and you have your aerodynamic handshake from the front to the back, it's not giving them what they expect, and they don't quite know why. And in that case, it might actually make sense for him to do some wild, random outlier experiments just to have more data for the people who are trying to fix the mathematical tools. And if that sounds boring and dull, it is, but it's also crucial to the design of a modern Formula One car.
I'd care more if Hamilton was staying there long term.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. I get accused of being a Hamilton fan. So
I don't know why.
I don't know why. I don't sort of see the point in what he's doing. Just for your reputation, for your confidence, for your fans, just go and make the best of every weekend. You're not fixing that, unless I'm going to be instantly proved wrong. I don't think anyone is fixing that car. No, none of these experiments are going to put them into a on merit, on pace, race winning position, unless they believe that that's possible, or Toto Wolff is saying it is possible. So they could be going, I don't think it's possible, Gaffer. We can't get up to the front. It is possible, or you lose your jobs. Sorry. Did I say impossible? I meant totally possible. Let's keep experimenting. Whilst you then update your CV and apply to go to Aston Martin.
Totally possible. Extremely unlikely is probably how I would describe it. But he may be gathering data that the team genuinely needs. the team might also just be willing to let him do whatever makes him feel better about the weekend, because he's leaving anyway. So why get too fussed about it? I mean, there's a lot of different speculative interpretations we can put on it. But at the end of the day, they choose to do what they choose to do. And you have to figure that whatever priority has led to that choice has been correctly selected by the team.
All right. Any more updates before we go to driver market? Imola next, isn't it? So
it's Imola.
Even though it's not the best for tons of wheel-to-wheel racing and overtaking, so it's a track that has been outgrown. It is a representative track, isn't it? If you've got developments, it's a bit like Barcelona. You've got all different types of corners, lots of slow stops for mechanical grip. You've got some fast, high aero corners, I suppose, as well. So maybe, if you do an upgrade at Imola, that makes enough sense. So you wouldn't want to bring a big upgrade package at Monaco, for example. That might not give you everything you want to know. And maybe Miami you could argue, isn't the best one either. Imola's probably the best of the bunch at the moment.
Yeah, no, you wouldn't want to bring it to any track that had a sprint race and any track that you didn't have a lot of historical data for, because what you mostly want to be able to do is compare to what you previously had. So
McLaren,
more data, more practice, that's what you want.
But McLaren did it for Miami, and it worked.
Well, McLaren they've been pretty bullish on, essentially, I think we saw at Miami the car they were hoping to have at the beginning of the year, but they're doing a bit of an overcut with their development.
Yes, that's it. That is a really interesting concept, the fact that you can overcut and undercut with your development. So I would have described McLaren's development as an undercut this season, and it was an overcut last season, maybe.
Yeah, well, for them, they're introducing late the car they wanted at testing. So I call it an overcut. But it's earlier than teams that showed up with the car they wanted can bring their development. So in that sense, just in the sense of the timing of the season, you're right. It is an undercut this season. I was looking multiple seasons.
Right. Mercedes actually are in danger of dropping out of the top four. So, you could argue that maybe they are. But if Aston get a step up in their development and they seem to be in phase with Mercedes, and Mercedes get it wrong, which... when's the last time they got a big update package correct? They could fall legitimately behind McLaren. So they should be up ahead of where McLaren are. McLaren look solidly the third best overall outfit at the moment. I mean, Miami aside, Ferrari's still number 2. But you would have put Mercedes behind that. Mercedes are one poor upgrade package away from being legitimately the 5th best car at the moment.
I disagree.
Okay.
I mean,
I'm being pessimistic. I'm sad.
I will go with if it's tragically wrong. Okay. I would agree with you.
Yeah.
But Russell and Hamilton as a pair of drivers far outclass Alonso and Stroll, and the car itself seemed faster in Miami. Overall, I have to go back and look at where everybody finished, because, of course, that was 2 weeks ago, and many things have happened in those 2 weeks. So,
no, true. Obviously, the Saturday performance definitely has made the Mercedes seem worse than it is, because they end up then scrapping with with wild bucking Haases and Magnussens. Like, why are they in a fight with a Haas that's faster on the straight? Right, I think. The Haas is probably quicker in a straight line, so they struggle to get past that. And by the time they get to any reasonable area where they can show their pace, it's far, far too late. But yeah, you're right. It was better in Miami. We're damning them with faint praise by saying so.
Yeah, no, they're a team that should be fighting for podium positions. That's their history. That's where they came from. And they're well outside of that. I think over the course of a season, though, I just don't see Aston really catching them.
See, the big change here is if you had to bet now what's going to be the final. There's two things: the final championship order for the constructors, and when we get to the season, what's the ranking of fastest race car? So they're two very different things, because you get into the final third, and some teams go, nah, let's sack this off. We've got 25 to work on. It might be less so now because the big look forward thing is now 2026. So if you're going to divert resources, that would be the way to divert them. But really, I think if you say, the championship points to me is probably the biggest indicator of success for the season. And now, really, my only real pre-season prediction change is Mercedes being out of that order. Yeah, everything else looks good. Like Mercedes and Ferrari being interchangeable was my sort of big pre-season bet. Take Mercedes out of that, and everything looks like it's falling. Then McLaren, and then Aston Martin, and then I suppose Alpine. I don't think we called Alpine being quite as low, but we did call VCarb taking a bit of a step forward. VCarb, my goodness, I did it. I fell for it.
You did.
Visa cash
that's
out.
it.
No, it worked.
VCarb, they succeeded. Their marketers are at home cackling over their ABBA.
You cunning
abacus.
bastards, you got me. Right. But yeah, Mercedes is the big joker in that. And you basically go, how far can Mercedes recover in the championship table? I think now third it would be ambitious. That would be like the top end. If everything goes well, they could climb back to third.
I would be happy with fourth this season. And now I will point out though, you're going to make that face, and I've advanced this argument before. They're 2 years behind on development compared to all the other teams. Only this season did they start with what they thought was a correct base. And they still don't have their tools worked out. So what they're bringing, their full understanding of the platform is going to evolve rapidly over the course of this season. So if I was counseling someone in the depths of a Mercedes depression, let's call it, I would say, look, they've got a brand new car this season. They're trying to figure it out. If it works out and they get a handle on it, then next season, I fully expect to see them back into fighting for the top three. Okay. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Great. Let's going to move on to the driver market. My bumpers aren't working today, so I'm just going to have to play the bumper, the visual. I go dun 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 dun. Okay, good. Driver market. The big news in that, Matt, is I actually don't think me just making the tune is as good as the normal one.
Yeah, it's Albon is all aboard the Williams train, of course.
He's signed on. Now they're billing this big news. Albon is staying. And these announcements, once they're made, you have to be all in. So when you get married, you have to pretend that Debbie wouldn't have also made a perfectly good wife. You have to pretend that Derek, wasn't in nightclubs late at night all the way up to decision time as to whether it goes ahead, and they put the deposit down on that local village hall that they can't really afford, but there's no other options. I know it sounds like I'm talking about me, but I'm not. I promise. I had no doubts. It was fine. She's way above my league.
Nothing personal there.
But once it's all settled down, you have to sort of pretend that no other person would have been right for either of the people. Tim Minchin does a great song called "If I Didn't Have You, I'd Probably Have Someone Else." So this is the situation the drivers find themselves in, which is Albon was actively pushing for, and I believe his representation was deliberately misleading leading journalists and putting out rumours to try and put him in the mix for those top seats. I'm going to say it.
You say it.
I'm going to say it. Albon is settling. The prettiest girl at the prom said no, and now he's said, Meredith, you're my first choice. I always wanted to invite you to the prom, and now I'm going to give you the biggest. What's the thing you put on the wrist or the
corsage?
The corsage. I'm going to buy the biggest corsage for you, Williams. It's always been you. You were here all along, but it's a lie.
Yeah. Well, my alternate take is I think pretty much yours. Turns out Mercedes not that interested, because realistically, of the available teams, Mercedes was the only one he could have gone to that would have been a considerable step up. And it seems like that he wasn't really on their radar in the way that he wanted to be. That said, I'm also guessing that Doralton is now paying him a nice, handsome salary.
Good point.
And there's a lot to be said for having James Vowles as your team principal. And there's a lot to be said for Williams. They're throwing a lot at the wall right now. Whether any of it sticks remains to be seen. But there's certainly a team trying to make an advance, and a team that finally has the resource to do it. So he could have picked a worse. He could have made a worse choice than Williams. How about that?
Yeah. Williams is dependable. Homely. They'd never cheat on Alex. That's it's the sensible choice. Yeah, it's not. It's not that. It's not that. It's not that bad boy rock star that was paying them so much attention. But I do think it's the right choice. And notwithstanding Albon's vast personal wealth, I don't begrudge any athlete for taking a big contract. So I certainly wouldn't judge Sainz for taking the big Audi contract over a Red Bull shot. I didn't judge Ricciardo for taking the 40 million from Renault. You can call it what it is, but that's fine. It's a really limited career. So if someone says 40 million for for the Renault contract or stay at Red Bull that ended up winning championships, yes, the glory was at Red Bull, but why not have $40 million? So yes, I don't judge anyone for taking a contract like that. I think my slightly unfair point is that it is an unfair point, but it's true, is that they actively tried to get a drive somewhere else and they couldn't, and now Williams is the dependable, solid choice, and maybe they're offering him enough money to make it worth it. But then I think Vowles is defending Albon a little bit with the refusal to just yield. It seems like there's a refusal to just yield to having Antonelli in there for 6 months to go and prove how good he is against Albon and then go to Mercedes. So there feels like that element, and perhaps James Vowles is a big factor in committing in what you would say is reasonably early in the driver market.
Yeah, well, I mean, Mercedes is essentially telling Williams, we want you to run Antonelli for half a year, then we want him. And Vowles is like, look, we'll run him for half a year, but then we want the next year too, because anything less than that is absolutely absurd. And you know what? Vowles is right here. I know Mercedes has a strong personal belief in the ability of Antonelli to come into Formula One and be highly competitive in a Max Verstappen kind of way. And I'm just going to point out that my recent experience watching rookies come into this particular aerodynamic regulation set tells me that no matter how talented they are, no matter how well prepared they are, it takes a while to get enough experience to drive these cars well. So I think Vowles is right here.
All right. In not defense of, but in testament to the value Albon brings. So Tim Rudd points out in our live chat, hello, patron chat. We did this at the last minute, so we're only streaming live to the patrons, but this is obviously on the main feed. On another pod, Tim, how dare you on another pod? Don't come in here with your... What other pods are there? What are you listening to? Unbelievable. Okay, betrayal. On another pod, they suggested that the Alpine drivers were sniffing around Williams. So that might be more of a reflection on Renault. So if Williams genuinely had the option of Gasly and Ocon, then it is quite the compliment to then commit to Albon.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, bird in the hand, two in the bush. They have worked directly with Albon. He clearly works well with the team, has a good rapport with the engineers, and say what you will about him. He's shown himself to be the kind of driver that Formula One wants to have around long term. He's a good bet. He's a good driver. He's got what is needed to drive that team forward. So why would you get rid of that for another driver that you've never worked with before?
And now, I know we shouldn't judge people by how they perform in the media, because perform in the media. But when Albon does any kind of interviews and bits to camera, or Sky does a segment of let's hang out with Albon, he definitely comes across like more and more. He's sure in his own skin. He can be the Williams ambassador. He can be their kind of stalwart. Which for the midfield team, sometimes you just need that. You need that kind of steady hand at the tiller, and that's certainly what Haas did. They wanted their two steady hands.
Yeah, well, they wanted people who already knew how to drive the car, who didn't need their hands held, and who could, who could make the choices that normally would keep the car out of the wall, unless they were ordered to, drive so that your teammate can score a point.
What is a news item that is in our document that you could talk about on your own for 120 seconds while I go and have a comfort break and refresh my drink, and then we'll talk about the direct Miami F1 versus NASCAR Darlington fan experience?
Well, how about I start with Magnussen makes a mark?
Go for it.
And then if I run out of time, it'll be tires, as always.
Just start singing. That's all right.
I could do that too. No, one of the stories that actually just popped up as I was getting ready for the show today was that the FIA and the stewards had applied these 10-second penalties to Magnussen for leaving the track and gaining an advantage. But the stewards themselves noted that it seemed a little insufficient given sort of the larger tactic that was in play there, which is namely protecting his teammate with a broken DRS and the manner in which he was doing so. Essentially, as we discussed at the time, not allowing the competitor behind to have a proper shot. This is different, I think, to how he drove in Jeddah, where he found himself ahead, but then legally stayed on track and kept everybody behind. I think that's fine. That's not what they're talking about here. They're talking about that shot all the way across, taking Hamilton and himself off track, and then still staying in front so that Hamilton essentially couldn't compete in the race by his illegal driving. And what has happened is they themselves have said, yeah, you know what? We think this is a problem. And so I believe it's going to be a Friday discussion for the FIA and the stewards and probably some driver representatives, but they might well be starting to convert these sorts of penalties to immediate drive-through. So if you don't give the position back within a lap or two, you're going to get hit with a drive-through during the race. And I don't have Spanners here at the moment to argue with me, but I'm just going to go with my super duper hot take right here. And that's why Spanners was completely wrong about everything.
I just sat down, I heard that, and I'm interested in everything you said.
I'm going to go with, I think the FIA is absolutely right here. I think if we see driving of the sort that we saw from Magnussen in Miami, absolutely I'm in favor of, if you gain an advantage off track and you don't hand the place back, drive through 110% within 2 laps. You got 2 laps and then you get a drive-through penalty and you have another lap. You have another 2 laps to serve it and done. Because that negates the competitive advantage and removes the incentive for drivers to do that.
When's the last time we saw a drive-through? Like it seems to be a thing of the past.
Yeah, well, this is what I was discussing. They're going to bring them back for leaving the track and gaining an advantage.
Good. How was it? How was he? Live chat. Was he behaved? Was it just tire chat?
I didn't even get to the tires.
Oh, okay. So I think I'm going to assume you're finished with that point.
Yeah, no, it was you hit it. You hit it dead on right at the end of the topic.
Or you planned it perfectly and went, how long would it take Spanners to wee and get a rum and coke? So well done. Good skills.
Oh, thanks.
So what I'm going to declare here is that the news portion of this particular show is over, but we are going to take another 15 or 20 minutes to talk about the F1 experience versus the NASCAR experience. However, we are going to keep it to, that sort of the top line topic. If you want to hear our personal experiences, I think we're going to do basically a little travel log, which is going to be very informal on Friday for the Patreon pod. So look, it's going to be worse content, but yes, behind a paywall. But me and Matt are able to do anything, spend the time doing this, doing the recent increase in shows, the interviews we've done this season, because we're Patreon supported. So if you would consider going to patreon.com/missedapex and going, yeah, the enjoyment I get out of these guys is worth $5 a month, then that will open up the Slack chat, the extra Patreon pods that we tend to do before a race weekend on a Friday, which is, hey, we've watched a bit of F1. We'll talk a little bit about that, but it's a little bit more informal. So you get that. We've got a great Slack forum. Please come and join us there. And also you'll get ad-free feeds, except for the Patreon feed last week, which I literally did from the side of a NASCAR track. And all I could do was download an MP3 from the main feed. Patrons were outraged, Matt. They were outraged that they got British adverts delivered to them. So I am sorry about that. That's all I could do.
It's like being in first class and they have to check your bag anyway.
Oh
I am
can you
outraged.
believe it?
How dare this happen?
Well, it would be nice to know. That would be a nice problem to have. I don't have that problem. But yeah, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/missedapex. We can commit so much of our emotional energy and time towards this project because we're so well supported. That's it. Full stop. And if you support podcasts that don't have industry backing like ours, even if you don't support us, and you're a podcast consumer and you listen to that podcasts as much as Spotify that you pay for or Netflix that you watch, look at the podcasts you love and consider supporting them. That's how you'll save the podcast industry from every podcast being a cookie cutter show with paid people on it. I mean, there's lots of good podcasts with people who are just paid by a corporation, but if you want to support the independents, then Patreon is 100% is the best way. I don't know. I play with my pitches for Patreon. The support for independent pods and affecting the pod industry is the best one I can think of, because we're living proof of that.
Yep, we really are.
All right. So, given that I've warned you that the newsy bit is over, how do we rate the F1 Miami experience to the NASCAR Darlington experience? And you can compare that as well to Formula E races you've been to, as can I. We can compare various hospitality things, because you've been comped VIP to Formula E. I got a sponsor, gave me and Brad a Friday paddock pass ticket to Silverstone, which basically ruined F1 for me because it was so beautiful. We've now had the ultimate VIP experience in NASCAR, and we went up to the stands on the Saturday as well to get that side of things too. So I think we're in a position where we've come from, motorsport has always been a TV sport for us, and then suddenly we are then, in the last year or so, we have got the experience that we've always looked at from afar and gone, I wonder what that's like. And as Adam is pointing out, the sprints, which I've been so much against, you kind of become a hypocrite, because the sprint was brilliant. And it was a great thing for us at trackside. So I don't know, where do we start on this, Matt, from the experience? What did you prefer, NASCAR or F1?
All right. Well, rather than picking the one that I prefer.
Oh, you're scared. You're scared because Steve, who invited us to hang out with 2311, listens to the show, and you're scared of saying the wrong thing and never getting invited again. You coward.
Yes.
You coward.
But also, I want to go with, and you pointed this out in your introduction. One of the problems we have here is it was a bit of an apples and oranges experience. Our Formula One experience was entirely self-funded on track. So all three of our visits, we bought all of our tickets. We had no special access or anything. Whereas the NASCAR thing was the dead opposite of that, and really was closer to what I experienced when I had the VIP status at Formula E. But we did do the Friday in the grandstand. So I want to start with my grandstand to grandstand points of comparison. Number one, if you're going to the race, it's way less expensive to go see a NASCAR race in the grandstand than it is to go see a Formula One race.
Did you look up the prices?
I did, yes.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
So,
and the most expensive ticket for the fall race in Darlington that I found was around $150 for the Sunday race. And you know what we paid for ours.
I think we can be honest. I mean, we went there with no plan, and we were monitoring the tickets. And thank you to Adam Rosales from the MotoGP podcast, who kept saying, don't buy tickets. He basically said, just go to Miami, don't buy tickets. And that made me and you very nervous. It did. But Christina Lee Mace and Adam were so confident, because they go to a lot of these. They said, literally, don't buy. In fact, we've got to get Adam on for a full travelogue show. I said we'll do that. So we'll do advice. I don't want to give too many people advice on how to get good tickets, though. That's the problem. But we'll get Adam on to talk about that. And they said, basically, don't buy tickets until you're there. Friday, they were giving them away, pretty much. So I think we paid maybe $60. To get it, or was it $37?
Yeah,
that's right. So the parking cost more than getting into the track. So that was good. And to me, the Friday experience is fantastic. I've had a Friday experience at Silverstone as well, and it's just pure. Let's watch the race cars go by, no pressure. So if there was a track nearer me, if all the tracks were near me, I would go to Friday every time and not mind going on the Saturday and Sunday.
Yeah. So right off the bat, second point of comparison. In NASCAR, you can get a lot closer to the cars and tracks in the grandstand than you can in Formula One.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you can feel the cars going past.
Yeah, and you could see the thing that I loved in NASCAR, where we sat in the grandstand, and we only watched the Xfinity race. This isn't even the Cup cars that are the really fast ones. Is you could so clearly see all the different lines the drivers were taking, how they were rotating the cars. I even got hit, I think, by a piece of...
You did, a bit of tire rubber hit you.
Smacked me in the arm.
It's like you're the god of tires, and the rubber was like, there he is, our god, and leapt out to go and find you.
It was amazing to be that close to the action. It's just a visceral thing that I didn't get quite as much with Formula One, with two exceptions.
And so we should say that, Stefano Domenicali's excuse for changing the engine regs in 2030 was so that it could be louder for the fans. So that's one of the key things he said.
Yeah.
We can compare the sound directly between the two. You could comfortably watch the F1 without ear defenders. Just no problem. If you've got a little kid there, yes, stick some ear defenders on them. But I was completely 100% fine. You couldn't talk when the cars were going by. You couldn't have a conversation, but it didn't hurt your ears. The NASCAR hurt our ears, even in the stands, even in the pits. Like, it was like painful. I had to go and like solve that situation. So I didn't have any because we just watched F1, which is loud. But then I got to NASCAR and went, oh, I need to go and get some, and I had to go to the car and get ear defenders.
Yeah, no, the Porsche Super Cup is definitely louder than the Formula One, but I'm going to say it now. I'm going to say it again. The first time I heard that power unit in practice, I got goosebumps. I've never heard an engine that sounded like that. It sounded like a spaceship. It was amazing.
Yeah, you can hear the engineering.
Oh, yeah, it's such a great sound. And I just, going back to 2014, Formula One missed a huge marketing trick, not making a bigger deal out of how amazing these power units are.
No, because it's always volume is better. It's always volume is better. And so when they at the Autosport show, NEC Birmingham, they'd show off these all electric GT cars, and they would pump up the music, because there's an embarrassment about a car not making any sound and doing all these displays and tire burnouts, when really the car's amazing. And the fact there's no sound and no waste energy going out of sound is amazing. But they pumped up the volume because we associate a good car with a loud car.
Yeah, and Adam in the chat is saying angry braking, off-throttle engines are incredible to hear in person, and they really, really were.
Challenge. You said you could see more about the lines in NASCAR. We saw turn 18, which was the final proper corner in Miami, the big hairpin, big stopping zone. I felt like we could tell the difference between the profile of the cars where they could accelerate. So like Verstappen was accelerating mid-corner and pointing to the grandstands. And where he started touching or being really close to the exit wall was meters earlier than the other cars. And so you could see some drivers, you could see Stroll barely made it to the exit wall. So I do feel like any motorsport where you're there on the ground with your eyes on it, you'll be able to see the lines that drivers take more than a moving camera on TV.
I'm glad you bring this up, because this is an important thing that I learned. And I already kind of knew it, but I didn't understand how it applied to motorsport. Because you're right, you could see there was an elevation change, there was a bump. You could see some cars getting light over the bump, losing the rear. You could see the drivers fighting the car out of that hairpin on throttle. And in NASCAR, it was the same thing. You're close. You could see the little deviations in the asphalt. You could see the different lines the drivers were taking, how some of them were rotating early, some of them were going late, some were doing a diamond line, some would stay up high, go down low, late apex. You could see all of that. But what is a common feature here is how much television flattens all of this granular detail. You just cannot see it.
Oh man,
on the TV.
Yeah. I mean, one of the best corners, one of the most underrated corners, is turn 3 at Silverstone. So you come through Copse, the right-hander. There's the left-hander, which is flat, and then the cars break down to enter that slow village section towards the loop. And then hearing the cars under braking from the village grandstand, you could feel the skill of the drivers. So you could feel how well their downshifts were going. There's one car in particular where all of a sudden it made sense why that 2013 driver wasn't able to make an impact. And you go, wow, it sounds so different. Like, audibly, I could hear when it was that bottom 6 driver in particular coming into that complex. And yeah, that's the kind of thing you do get, and it doesn't come across on TV. Also on TV, they're not going to go, listen to how bad those downshifts are, or how badly he's, working on the brakes.
Yeah, and part of that is you're sat in a location, so you get to see all the drivers do the same thing. And that's true both in NASCAR and Formula One. I mean, I think my takeaway on this is if you want to be right up close and you want to have lots of access, I think NASCAR is clearly your choice. There's no doubt about it.
I hate the fact that the NASCAR thing blew our socks off more. It did, didn't it? I mean, we've got 2 videos. One was the Xfinity race where I pointed it at the thing and then I flipped the camera to point at us, and we were both basically in shock. And then the start of the NASCAR Cup race on the Sunday, it was absolutely mind-blowing. The herd of whatever it was, 38 NASCARs flying past you was a much more visceral experience. And it just blew me away in a way that F1 never has done. So that's one to NASCAR, unfortunately. So,
I mean, I would just say that, we were sitting in a stand, and not just me, not just the water bottle I was holding, but the entire stand was vibrating when that race start happened, and on every race start, and even up in the stands with the Xfinity. I mean, when they came by as a pack, you could feel the massive air they displaced just like swirling past you. It was just absolutely lovely.
Oh, and I will say we're going to do a proper show that has all those interviews. I think I mentioned that at the start.
Oh, yeah. Well, I mean, at the start again, of the show. Getting to interview Bubba and Tyler.
But so we're not NASCAR fans,
Frankie, Freddie.
But we've obviously heard of some of those drivers, and Bubba Wallace is like a legit superstar. And,
he is.
So not really a spoiler, but we got to speak to these guys. Tyler's really lovely, Tyler Reddick, and probably performing the best out of those two at the moment. But I could have a chat to him. We were chatting about lines and the crash risk around there. When we got into motorhome and Bubba Wallace turned up, there's a star quality. And I suddenly went, I'm not a fan, but like I suddenly immediately was. And I go, oh, wow, I can tell why you've made such an impression. But we have interviews with those guys, and it's a very Missed Apex interview.
Very Missed Apex interview.
The way it went down, and the PR guys looking across to us like, I guess that's kind of an interview, but yeah.
That's what you wanted? Good for you.
I guess the other thing to look at is from a on-site point of view. So I don't know if Darlington's a fair representation, but Miami kicks Silverstone's ass from a turning up and being able to function point of view. The food was incredible. It was all well signposted. There was gangways to everything. All the viewing was actually pretty good, given that I don't think it's as good a track as Silverstone, but the proper shading, everything was well thought out. Like, it's a great venue, and you could climb up the actual arena and then look over the track as well. So yeah, I was so impressed with Miami. I didn't want to be one of those, oh, you have to be there to experience the venue, but it was so good.
Yeah, I would say that the experience of being at the Formula One race was, from a crowd point of view, I don't want to say better, but it was more impressive, the number of people there, and just the ability to like wander up to the stadium and watch from different vantage points and things like that. That was really, really fantastic. And just they had all the fluttery tents you could sit under, and there was a lot that Miami did better than I expected them to do. And now maybe, again, this is because we follow Formula One, so maybe our bar is much higher.
Yeah. Whereas the NASCAR was like good concession stands. It was all accessible and it was brilliant, but every Miami restaurant, every Miami stand was like a restaurant. So even the hot dog I ate, I think, it's going to get spoken about more, but, Christina kept saying, watching you eat that hot dog was a sight. Because it was so good. I couldn't believe it. Whereas, Darlington, I'm told Darlington is not the most glamorous. So maybe we need to go to Daytona to make it fair.
Daytona or Charlotte. We need to go to one of the super speedways.
Okay, good.
I think that's going to have a similar Miami vibe to it. Okay. I think that's a fair comparison.
And then, go on.
Yeah. So and now I'm going to get to two more things that I think NASCAR wins on. And not just because I'm hoping Steve will invite me to Nashville to see their new driver debut. You can understand how pathetically I'm pleading for that to happen, because that is a very short hop for me. But I won't do that. No pleading here. No, I cannot be bought.
Dressed head to toe in
Dressed head to toe on their merch. But honestly, this is my honest opinion, though. One thing they get right is the driver introductions.
Oh,
you were there. Tell me that F1 is not missing a trick.
F1 is missing a trick. So Circuit of the Americas, maybe 2018, 2019, and they had the Let's Get Ready to Rumble guy, and he was going, next up from McLaren, it's Fernando Alonso. Honestly, introducer they had at the NASCAR race, all the drivers had nicknames. They all had their own intro. They all got to then walk across the stage and do whatever they pleased. So it was a bit awkward with F1. They just came out of the tunnel and sort of waved. In NASCAR, they walk past the crowd. So if they want to give out hats, they can throw out hats. A bunch of them did. There was fire, and fire's always cool. There's fire blowing out of the top of the stuff. Some of them brought their kids on with them. Tyler brought their 4-year-old on, and some people brought like guests. So it was a throwback. So some of them were in classic overalls, and one driver brought out an old NASCAR driver with him in those overalls. And you go, yeah, it was a spectacle. Like, why not? What is the possible objection to that? But I'm afraid England ruined it. England got really, really upset when they did those driver announcements. And then F1 went, okay, sorry. We shouldn't have done that. I beg your pardon.
It's terrible. They had a DJ. Each driver kind of had his own tune to saunter out to. They had inside jokes about the drivers that were going on because they do them every weekend. And adding to it, they did throwback. They did legacy liveries at the race, and they were fantastic. And why Formula One doesn't have a legacy livery race is just beyond me.
Again, I think it's England's fault. So do you remember when McLaren made a huge deal that like, oh my God, we've done this amazing thing. You're not going to believe it. Invited the press to go and have this event pre-Monaco. And, you had great journalists going, look, we've been so impressed by this thing. You wait till you see it. And what it was that golf livery at Monaco, which is it's not really, it's more of like a Le Mans livery. I don't even know if it was in F1 at all. And the whole of Europe just went, why did you build that up? But if there was a designated race that was the throwback race, say Silverstone, and they go, right, okay, teams, pay tribute to something in F1 history, and you go, okay, brilliant. So, Mercedes could run a 1950s livery, McLaren could turn up in the Marlboro Red if they wanted to. And it's okay. Everyone was sponsored by bad people in the olden days and still are now. So, but you could have the Rothmans livery for Williams and make it like everyone's doing it and have a throwback weekend. Yeah, that's a great thing to do. And this boils down to the main cultural difference between Americans and Europeans, which is you guys have fun out loud on purpose, and Europeans, for whatever reason, we can't admit to having fun. Everything has to be serious, and then we have to accidentally have fun, but not really admit it.
Yeah, it is very true. Oh, I've had to take you, my guest, to a pub to shoot pool and drink beer, but I wouldn't be enjoying it if you weren't here.
Yes, of course, I'd normally just sit cross-legged at home doing nothing and meditating and maybe grumbling.
Sticking pins in my arm.
Yeah, just have fun on purpose, F1. That would be... And just ignore Europeans, because we do want to have fun, really. But even if you have fun on purpose and we do enjoy it, we'll tell you we didn't. But we're lying. Ignore us.
All right. And this brings me to my last point where I think NASCAR clearly won. And you're going to be surprised at this. Or maybe not.
Okay, I'm ready.
110% pit stops in NASCAR are the bomb.
There's so much. So F1 pit stops win. Like, okay, I get
disagree. Hard disagree.
No, but I think I'm going to end up agreeing with you. But F1 pit stops win because they're so quick. It's a well-oiled machine. The skill level on the pit stops is incredible, and they've developed the technology specifically to make those pit stops better and better and better, whether it be through regulation or team innovation or training, right? But also, you've basically got, Jane from HR and Derek from finance just going, oh, okay, we've got to change the tyres now. In F1, all those people have different roles, right? In NASCAR, it's a dedicated pit stop team, and they've basically made it as hard for them as possible. So they've got a specific fuel guy who has to throw fuel in just from a canister. So you know how F1 had all those...
jerry can.
Yeah, had those pumps and nozzles? No, it's just a jerry can with a long extra bit that they have to tip upside down and then throw in. The tyres, when they take a tyre off, they throw it at the pit wall. And I think it was one of the chief engineers just like reaches over and grabs the tyres as they roll in and then puts...
It's amazing. They roll that used tyre to the pit wall because there's only so many people allowed over the wall, but you can stand there and grab things. And the guy at the wall has the new tyre and rolls it back as they're running around the car to lift the other side because they only have one jack.
But there's only enough guys to do one side at a time.
2 tires, one side at a time, basically.
And then they have to run to the other side and then go. And it's vital because it's like having a longer braking zone. So if you have only a short braking zone, there's not many overtaking opportunities. So Formula One, suffers from that. If you made everyone's brakes worse and made the braking zones longer and more difficult, then there's time for there to be a differentiator. So the longer pit stops in NASCAR meant that there was lead changes because of the pit stops and the level of complexity. And those guys are dedicated pit stop guys in the back at the airspeed factory, which I got a tour of. I don't know if you got a tour of a NASCAR team factory or not, but I did. So I don't know, maybe I win that. But
I think you win that. Yeah.
Those guys have like their own
for the time
section,
being,
their own gym, and it's a sport amongst itself. And we stopped and spoke to the pit crew after because unfortunately, the driver made
the unfortunate ending.
Yeah, the driver made a bit of a hasty move and and ended up basically out of the points. But the pit crew did everything they could, and they were distraught as well. But I was like, guys, like the fact that we noticed how well they did to get their driver into the lead, this guy just went, oh my God. He was like, that honestly means the world, because I think it might be, a very underrated role.
It is the most spectacular part of the race in a lot of ways for me, being able to, I just stood there and watched them do this time after time. And I watched them make up a place. And you saw, because they would put it up there, unlike Formula One, that you can run multiple cars side by side. So they had picked 2311, the pit closest to the exit line. And time after time, just centimeters separating them from the car behind him. So despite how hard they make it and despite how much chance and luck could play into it, the top teams are all completing these stops within tenths of each other, within hundreds of each other sometimes. And it matters. They gain position. You could lose a position. They won a stage gaining a position in the pits. We saw that happen.
Can I make a confession? This is a personal, our friendship confession.
Yeah.
So when I was when I turned up at the track, I turned up in the morning, and you didn't fly in until midday for the qualifying day. I spoke to some of the local people, and they were giving me advice on what to do and not do with media access. We had full media access. It was great. And so you were taking photos and cover. You were leaning over the pit wall, basically. You were leaning in, and you were maybe 1.5 meters from the pit stop. So you really had this amazing view, and I'm sure you've got some great photos of the pit stops and stuff. The first thing I got told by multiple people with media access was, whatever you do, don't lean over the pit wall, don't even get close to the pit wall, because the lug nuts have a habit of flying off and sailing in, and people have been hurt from that before. And I totally forgot to tell you until I was up in the stand, and then I saw you leaning over the pit box during the pit stop, and went, oh, I was supposed to tell Matt, don't be exactly where you were.
Well, that's how I get the good pictures, though.
Yeah.
Ask any photographer. Yeah. That's how you get the good pictures.
Okay, but sorry for not saving you from a potentially
I've been injured worse before.
Okay, so unfortunately, one place where NASCAR wins, and I don't want NASCAR to win because I'm an F1 fan, is the level of fan access. So even in the stands, you see much more. You see more things going on. You're closer to the action. But the VIP tickets are nowhere close to the F1 VIP tickets. So I've only ever had a VIP ticket paid for me into the Paddock Club. But it's much cheaper to get the VIP passes at NASCAR, and you can just literally walk up and down pit lane. During the sessions, during the races, you can walk to the garage where all the haulers are, where the motorhomes are, behind where the cars are being fixed, and they just actively let a large amount of fans into that section, whereas the overwhelming impression I've had from several F1 events is that you are broadly in the way. And unless you can pay top dollar, you basically, it's like, get your hamburger, sit in your stand far away, and leave us alone. They are not, obviously there's bigger numbers, so it's harder to say, well, everyone just come in. But the accessibility of NASCAR, even over series like WEC and stuff like that, it's a big part of their makeup is saying, no, fans need to be on top of us all the time.
Yeah, and you see drivers. I mean, I was amazed walking with Tyler back after the little driver introductions, the driver quote unquote meeting that NASCAR does, which was hilarious. because it was like basically you take these top drivers and you essentially give them the equivalent of a film strip of the same thing we get when we go karting about the rules. I'm like, I'm pretty sure this isn't the real driver meeting.
Yeah. And I think you see that. And so actually, but just in case you know, Matt, that wasn't open to the public. We got a special thing. That's why we were there. But the drivers have to watch like a karting safety video, almost to the point of, if you have long hair, make sure it's tucked into your overalls. Okay. So the way we'll do the coverage of the NASCAR stuff is we'll do that one-off special show, but it'll be a bit more documentary. So it'll be, we did this, and then we spoke to Brian, and Brian said we'll do the thing, and then we'll do the Patreon pod, which is much more about our trip. You can hear about how Matt tried to, I think on purpose, tried to kill me. You can hear about how I think we'd have died without Christina there. I think. Yeah,
no, we'd still be standing there arguing about which way to go in the Miami parking lot.
And if we'd have got lost, I would have planted and waited for someone to come rescue me, and no one would have done. So we'll do a bunch of that travelogue stuff on the Patreon pod. We'll see if Christina's free for that. If you want to hear that, subscribe to patreon.com/MissedApex. Just don't expect it to be better content. So I would like a link to the Formula E podcast, the MotoGP podcast, and the link to our Patreon so you can become a patron. What's the date? It's the 15th. So sign up for Patreon, and you won't get charged until the 29th. So if you want to do it, sign up, hear our experiences at NASCAR, and then hopefully forget to cancel, you can do that. Patreon.com/MissedApex. Thanks for hanging out with me, Matt. I'm going to go. It's 11:30 at night in the UK, and I'm only vaguely aware of what day it still is.
It's the best part about international travel now, isn't it?
Yeah, and I don't have the music lined up, so vamp for 30 seconds while I find it.
Absolutely. I will go on and record my brief thing about NASCAR pit stops is that they are human timed. F1 pit stops are amazing, but they're way too fast to appreciate. In NASCAR, you see the effort, sweat that goes into them, and that's why I like them better.
Okay, well, I can't find the outro, so until
it was 30 seconds, man.
It's not bad. I had enough time. Until we see you next, work hard, be kind, and have fun. This was Missed Apex Podcast. Close enough.